Hi guys, I'm Chris,
And Mike.
and welcome back to this week's No Limits of Mid-Trap podcast. How you doing this week, Mike?
It's episode 50. Can
Episode
you believe it?
50. No, I honestly can't
moly.
believe we're 50 episodes in.
What? And almost a year since our first episode. When did that come out? April, right?
Yeah, either late March or April, yeah, so.
Let's look at that real quick. 50. Man. Let's see. What was the date of episode 1? Intro, origin stories, and an aggressive operator. April 29th.
Oh, wow. So we're a month away from being a year. So a little under 11 months.
March, though, we were definitely planning. There were some things in the works. Things were brewing March of last year for sure.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a crazy year. It's been an awesome year. I'm glad that we've been able to, I've seen you more than I've seen you in college. You know?
It's awesome. I think this is the most we've seen each other this past week, besides when we lived together.
Yeah. No,
for sure.
Definitely.
And sometimes when we lived together, you'd be working, I'd be working, we'd be doing different things. We might have even seen each other less.
Yeah, no, definitely. So it's been a great year. It's gotten me through the pandemic, through quarantine, through defending. So thank you, Mike.
And a new child.
Yes. So we're halfway to 100. Got 50 more.
Well, let's see. I mean, we have how many books left if we finished? How many we finished?
We just did...
we just did the 9th rap book.
The 9th rap book. Plus
so
we did...
We're exactly halfway then.
Exactly halfway.
With rap 20 coming out this year. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to have to do some bonus stuff for Enemy at the Gates,
Yeah, just like we did last year, Road to Enemy at the Gates. Yeah.
Cover the book release tour when Kyle goes on tour, starts doing interviews, 3 times a day, running himself into the ground.
Yes. A lot of fun things planned for you. We got a lot of cool interviews planned for you, including the guy we have on today's episode. Like, this has just been a fun run of interviews we've been doing, and on top of our book pod. So you guys are in store for some good content.
I think we already have 3 recorded that'll come out in the ensuing weeks.
We get ahead, work. We were working, man.
Yeah, that's it. We're keeping busy. You know why we're keeping busy? Because we have some fantastic patrons, amazing people supporting the work we do here on Mid-Trap Pod. So thanks to you, our patrons, we can keep the podcast ad-free. You're the reason we got to episode 50 and beyond. And you're also the reason we are able to give back to Operation Paperback by sending monthly care packages of Vince Flynn books and other thrillers to our troops. We're already up to 100, maybe 30 books that we have sent out to our troops currently deployed around the world.
That's awesome. And speaking of our patrons, this episode is coming out the last week of March, so we need to do our March book giveaway.
Let's do it.
You ready? You got the wheel up?
I've got the wheel of names.
Insert spinny wheel sound right now. You should have that in.
That little thing, when the Wheel of Fortune is hitting like the little clicker. Yep.
Yeah. And the winner is?
Steph K. Steph K. Longtime listener and patron. Yes, indeed. Oh, there's also a shout out for Steph. She posted, and man, she got us on this. Why were we a little low on Protect and Defend? You know what was missing from that book?
Scott Coleman.
And the boys.
I know. She brought it to our attention, and we were reflecting on Tuesday night when we were golfing, and I was like, well, maybe that's why we didn't like this book. I didn't even think that, where the hell's Scott Coleman?
She's so right. That's what's missing. All the badass of Coleman and Wick and Hackett and Strobel, it wasn't there.
Yeah.
They were just gone.
So that's what makes a great book.
You got to have the team together, yeah. I feel like Kyle's done that quite a bit. Lethal Agent, I could remember a couple scenes, Total Power. But yeah. Steph, I mean, she is definitely deserving of this title. # Scott's biggest fan. She is all out Scott Coleman. So shout out to you. Thanks for being a patron. Thanks for supporting the podcast, keeping us on our toes, And for that, we have an autographed Vince Flynn book of your choosing to send out. So we'll be in touch.
You should put that a copy of Scott's Linguini in that signed book.
Scott's Linguini? What?
You don't remember this? They gave out.
Was that the cookbook, the rap cookbook?
No, it's like they gave out because remember he made that linguine pasta in Total Power
Total Power. Yep. At the house scene.
Yeah, at the house for the lady Sonia
with what's her name, Sonia. Yep. You're right.
And they posted the recipe on Kyle's website or something like that. So
I love those Easter eggs. That's good stuff. That's when you know you have a good publisher and publicist in the house for sure.
Yes.
Antics like that. Well, Chris, what are we covering on today's pod, episode 50?
Yes, we're so happy to have this guy on the podcast, bringing to you for episode 50. He is a former, this month we did Protect and Defend. We have Irene getting taken, her executive protection team, getting taken out. We have someone who is discreetly or intimately involved in that, someone who was involved taking care of or protecting a CIA
director.
There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. Now turned author. His name is Dave Austin. His book came out in December called Drone Strike. It was very good. I highly recommend it, as well as the first one, which came out last year, right? Or 2 years ago?
Tehran's Vengeance. I think 2019, man.
2019.
Joe Matthews, baby.
So, yeah, hope you guys enjoy this interview with Dave Austin.
Today we welcome Dave Austin, author of the Joe Matthews series and the recently released Drone Strike, his newest book, and also a former employee of the CIA. So, Dave, thanks for joining us tonight.
Oh, thanks, guys, for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, so if you could just start us out by just telling us more about yourself, what you've done in the past, your time in the CIA, and how you became an author.
Sure. I always start out, been married for 31 years to the same woman.
Nice.
I think with working at the agency, prior to that, I was in the Army. It takes a special person, to be the spouse of somebody in that kind of line of work. Because, you're gone so much, working a lot of hours, short notice travel, and they're back here dealing with everything on the home front. So really been fortunate there. Grew up a kind of an agency brat. I know a lot of people, familiar with the term military brat, but my dad was a 27-year veteran of the CIA. Majority of his career was overseas. So we moved around every 3 or 4 years overseas until I went to college. And then ended up, after that, going in the Army. Was an infantryman, served for 4 years. And then after that, joined the agency, kind of went in the family business there. Started out as a police officer. But after a couple of years, rolled over into the protective operations side of the house. So working on the group that does protection for chiefs of station overseas and in high-risk areas, and then later on the director's protective detail, and spent the majority of my time there on the director's detail. And then 2005, left the agency. Moved into the private sector to continue doing executive protection, but doing it on the corporate front, and have been doing that, supporting the CEO and the corporate leadership of one of the world's largest companies as they travel around domestically and internationally.
Wow,
cool. Is it harder to protect a CEO or the director of the CIA?
It's different. A lot of the principles are the same as far as, the principles of protecting somebody. Resources are definitely better in the government. Had more resources, had more authority. So doing it in the corporate world is a lot more finesse, I would say, probably. Dealing with some of the same type of issues, but, they're they're different, but they're similar enough that, you know, a lot of the skill set translates.
Gotcha. Well, someone who works also on protection is your main character, your protagonist, Joe Matthews. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how he as a character came to be and how you as a writer came about.
Let's start with the writing piece, because that's probably take a little bit longer. I'd always been an avid reader. Started out when I was a kid with the Executioner series by Don Pendleton, Mac Bolan, if you guys are familiar with him. You know, as I got older, moved into the Tom Clancy, and then you know, read all those books, and then just purely by accident bumped into the Vince Flynn series. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was in Dulles International Airport, and I was heading out on a trip. I don't remember where I was going. And this was back in the early days of Vince's writing. And I had a book or two with me in my bag, but nothing I was really thrilled, you know, about reading. And as I was walking to the gate, I passed one of the bookstores there, and the third option was sitting there front and center. And, you know, it was the copy with the big agency seal on the cover. Right. And immediately caught my eye. So I walked over, had no idea who Vince was. I didn't know that this was not the first book or that it was even a series. But, you know, I kind of read the book jacket and said, oh, this sounds pretty cool, you know, and read it on the trip and loved it. And then once I got home, found out that, you know, he had written other books, that this was kind of was it the third in the series?
Yeah, third, yeah. A second mid-trap, but third by Vince.
Yeah, right. Went back and found the other two, and have been hooked on them ever since. In fact, I've got 18 of the 20 on the bookshelf behind me. I think the two I don't have, I have on Kindle. Nice. So, you know, had always been, you know, a big reader, especially in this genre, because it, you know, was close to home with what I did at the agency. And so, you know, there was one day, and it was probably 10 years ago, and I was like, I wonder if I could do this, because I had never been creative with anything in my life. No creative writing, you know, can't draw to save my life, can't play an instrument, anything. So I sat down and I thought about it, and I go, well, what would I write? And, you know, the first thing that came to mind was an attack scene, you know, because that was just what I knew and felt most comfortable with. And I sat down for that first day and wrote for probably 3 or 4 hours, I guess. I maybe got through that one scene, and my brain hurt so bad. It was terrible. It was like one of the hardest things I'd ever done. But it was cool. I enjoyed it, you know, and it was fun. But ended up just kind of setting it aside. You know, work got in the way, life got in the way. It was one of those things, you know, I didn't give it much more thought. And then occasionally over the next couple of years, I'd pull it out and I'd work some more. And then eventually I started kind of working on a plot for the book, for the first one, Tehran's Vengeance. And, you know, worked on it bits and pieces and had a bunch of drafts, and, you know, folder on my computer had all these different versions and, you know, little notes and, you know, ideas and stuff like that. And then finally, I guess it was about 5 years ago, maybe, I just decided, I'm like, you know, I want to give it a shot. I want to finish it. You know, if nothing else, I can say, you know, I've written a book, you know, maybe get a few copies printed up for the, you know, family, and have it sitting on my bookshelf or something like that, you know. And so really put my mind to it, set aside, you know, time every day to write, and just kept at it. You know, got that first one knocked out, and found that I really enjoyed, you know, the process of coming up with the plot lines, and, you know, seeing where, you know, the characters grow and develop. And a lot of the stuff I had kind of planned out. And some things with the plot line too, but it was really cool that, you know, sometimes as I got writing, things would kind of take a left turn. You know, I'd be going along and I'm like, oh, you know what I thought happened, that, you know, is not as good, but I have a new idea, or I think, you know, what would the characters be saying, or things of that nature. So, that's just something I really enjoy and have a lot of fun with. And so, yeah, got the first one done. People really liked it. Got a lot of good feedback on it, and thought, well, we'll just continue with it. And it took me a while to come up with the plot for Drone Strike, but got that one kind of going and got it out. And so again, it's been another one that it was a lot of fun. And really had a good time with it, and feedback from it has been awesome, so really thankful for that.
No, we really enjoyed reading that. Thanks for sending us a copy.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks.
And interesting you said you started with an action scene, because I feel like you coming from that background can offer such an interesting perspective to these kinds of stories. And not a lot of the authors have backgrounds like you, but I do. We have interviewed a couple people who are in this line, and they are also writing. And I mean, even if you think about Kyle Mills, who took over for Vince, he per se wasn't in the field, but his father was a long time person in the FBI. So they bring this certain perspective, and I wanted, if you can just comment on how you think your time in the CIA influenced, how you write this character, Joe Matthews. I feel like he's a really interesting character, and very different than, like our character, Mitrap.
Sure. Yeah, I think, certainly my experience there has influenced or had a huge impact on the style of writing, I guess. It was the character development and things of that nature. I tried to pull, Joe Matthews is not, one person that I worked with. It's kind of bits and pieces, or maybe the guy that I'd want to be when I grow up, or something like that.
Right.
But the key for me was to use my background and experience to really enhance kind of the realism and authenticity of what's going on in the book, whether it's the story, or whether it's, the conversation, or when I'm describing, the CIA headquarters, or, someplace overseas, or things of that nature. I wanted people who had lived in that world, or in the military, law enforcement, to be able to read that and say, yeah, he knows what he's talking about. He's obviously kind of that, been there, done that kind of thing, right? But again, not make it so in the weeds that somebody else, like my in-laws, couldn't pick it up and just enjoy it as a thriller, and that was kind of one of my test readers there. And, they really helped me out a lot with the editing as well. That, they don't read thrillers, they don't read espionage stuff. They're more English literature folks, and read serious stuff. And so the fact that they could read it and and keep up and follow along, and then just really enjoy the story, was kind of striking that balance, the best of both worlds, where for the people who are in it, they got the realism and the authenticity, but it wasn't so over the top, or in the weeds, or deep in the woods, that somebody else who was not from that background and that life, couldn't pick it up and enjoy it as well.
You struck that balance perfectly in Drone Strike. A couple of tidbits come to mind with your insider info, particularly with the agency, where people are hiding in plain sight. There are a number of times where you have someone who has earbuds in with nothing playing, and it's like they're pretending to talk to somebody, so they look just like another average Joe. Or someone's reading the newspaper, but not really looking at the newspaper, kind of glancing over it. Yeah. I can only imagine those are kinds of those little tidbits you're talking about from an insider's perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of an area, when, I talk with people, or I think about, the difference between how we do protection at the agency versus, say, the Secret Service or the State Department, or, some of these other larger organizations. I think because of the nature of the CIA's mission, we end up incorporating a lot more tradecraft into what we do, into how we protect people, especially when working overseas and protecting chief of station and stuff like that in high risk areas. We're not just, when you have the Secret Service and they've got 40 or 50 people show up for an advance, and you can have everybody everywhere. We're a much smaller detail, and like I said, just depending on where we are and what we do, a lot of that tradecraft comes into play. Trying to maintain a low profile, be there, to support what we're doing, but not drawing attention to yourself. Things of that nature. So that is one of those kind of unique pieces to how we do protection at the agency.
One other thing that really comes through with your writing and how Joe Matthews operates is the camaraderie of the unit and the relationships between the teammates, because someone like Mitch Rapp, he works best as a lone wolf. And Kennedy even says, thank goodness he didn't have a military background. They scouted someone who they can start fresh and strip any idea of teamwork from, his sports days. They really wanted that lone wolf character. But Joe Matthews, and maybe this speaks to your Army experience, he thrives on the team and the guys with him in the fight, and he gives anything. I'm thinking of that opening scene, which I won't give too much away because we want our audience to go out there and buy the book. Yes. But I just remember the lengths he would go to for his teammates. Is that something you did purposefully?
Yeah, I think so. I think, looking at his background, starting in the Army, moving through Special Forces and then Delta, it's very much a team-oriented environment. And then when he goes to the agency, especially in the time when he's working in protective operations and, supporting, whether it's chiefs of station, it's, or it's the director's detail. That was one of the things that I loved so much about being there, was that camaraderie with the other people on the detail. I mean, we were a very close-knit group. You're working your shift and you've got, 4 or 5 or 6 other people with you that, literally, you're trusting them with your life. They're trusting you with theirs. Obviously the person that we're protecting trusts you, but it's a very close-knit environment. There is that camaraderie amongst the people on the detail. And I really wanted that to kind of come through in his interactions with Chris and the guys.
I guess just to touch on one more question from your time at the CIA. Do you have any that you can tell us, crazy or favorite stories from working protection at the agency?
I should have thought of that.
Probably can't tell us. It's okay.
Maybe we can come back to it.
Sure.
I'll think of that. We'll try to come back to it.
You'd tell us, but you'd have to kill us.
Yeah,
I don't want to do that.
I guess we can. Let's pivot a little bit to Mitch Rapp. You mentioned to us that you are obviously a fan of Mitch Rapp. We wanted to know first, do you have a favorite Mitch Rapp book? And second, do you have a favorite Mitch Rapp character, obviously other than Rapp?
Favorite book? I'd probably have to go with forgive me for not remembering the title. The one where the White House is taken.
Transfer.
Oh, the first one.
Transfer Power.
Yeah.
Classic.
That one. I loved that one. When he's in there sneaking around the house and he's got the older gentleman that was, the White House staffer or the butler or something like that. Yes. I really enjoyed that one. Obviously, Third Option has a place near and dear to my heart just because it was the first one that kind of got me into the Mitch Rapp world. Yep. So I would say those two. As far as other characters, I would have to say Stansfield. Yes. I really liked him. And just his kind of grace and dignity, in the position of DCI. Love Irene as well. Yeah, she's great. And, Scott Coleman. Scott's pretty cool, too. I kind of like Scott.
Yeah.
Those are 3 favorites. 3 fan favorites right there. Well, speaking of Rapp, we are covering Protect and Defend this month on our podcast, and we just wrapped up the first half of it, and we're about to get to the second half. There's a key scene I wanted to pick your brain about, because as someone on the inside who was tasked with protecting the DCI and the Director of Central Intelligence, Kennedy gets taken. And I think we can say that spoiler. People who listen to the podcast, they've read
it's probably been long enough that
spoiler alert.
No spoiler.
You don't have to put a spoiler before that.
And we can get into the specifics in a minute, but can you just give us the general overarching, what's it like when you are planning an international trip? You might be somewhere where the threat level is a little elevated, and you know that going into it. What in general is the climate like with your job and your colleagues going into those environments?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's a misconception or not, or maybe just something that's not talked about a great deal as people's perception of, protective detail, especially a government detail, whether it is, Secret Service or State Department or the CIA. But ultimately, our first and foremost responsibility is to prevent something from happening in the first place. It's not to go and, roll in and get in a gunfight and, that's all cool and everything. Because the longer that we're there in that gunfight, the longer the DCI or whoever the protectee is exposed to that threat and that danger, right? So, one of the things that we do is we do everything we can ahead of time to try to eliminate all of those risks. Something that didn't happen in the book that we would normally do. I know they mentioned they had an advanced team that got out probably a day prior, running the routes and stuff like that. Something like this, we'd probably be out a week prior. We would be there, running the routes like they did. Hopefully not getting lost and get shot up. If I'm not, I'm not giving something away.
I was surprised by that. Would you say that's kind of, is that a misconception? Because they go out the night before, it says they get 40 bullet holes rolling into a bad part of town.
Right.
Would you pull the plug at that point? Or is that just something that's so far-fetched in terms of fiction?
I wouldn't be gone.
Yeah, I'd pull the plug.
I think that at that point, our recommendation would be, let's not go here.
Yeah.
Let's go someplace else. Yeah. We can find some neutral place to, have everybody come together and we could meet there. But yeah, instead of rolling in the night before, we'd be there a week, probably. We'd have local support from the local office, which I know, Mitch did. I think anytime that you got like the local police involved, that's usually, depending on where you are, that can be pretty sketchy. Not something that is preferred. So yeah, if you did get shot up while you're doing your advance, we're probably not going to make that trip. But hopefully, we didn't have that situation during my time. We were able to get out, run the routes, and get back, in one piece. But yeah, you bring together kind of all the resources, and that was really nice about being with the agency. Is we would have local assets there, local CIA assets. If they had, I know in this case in the book, they had some trusted Kurds that were with them, that were kind of the only other, non-Americans there that were kind of trusted and in the trust tree there. We could bring in, State Department, military. We had trips to Baghdad at the height of the war, and we had military support as well as our agency support and contractors. And we would have a lot of tools in our tool belt that we could bring to bear. And, we would tend to use every one of them.
Yeah, speaking of that, like one of the requests in the book is that they don't want any American personnel visible. Would that to you be a red flag, like a no-go? Like we're not doing
specifically the military. They don't want to see any military outfits on site. Is that a collaboration that you rely on, or?
It would really depend. If we're going into Baghdad, we're going into Kabul, something like that. Some high-risk location. We would certainly not have a problem leaning on the military and asking them for support and assistance. Obviously, if we're going to London or Paris or something like that, that's not going to be the case. But for a high risk, trip like that, we would certainly collaborate with them if it was an option. And, and we thought it would help take care of some of the risks. And one of the other pieces that that kind of worked in our favor as opposed to the book is, with us being the superpower, we were the ones that set most of the conditions for those types of meetings. We weren't accepting conditions from the other guys about, yeah, we'll meet you here, but, don't bring this, don't bring that, don't do this, don't do that.
Yeah.
It was kind of the opposite. We were kind of setting the ground rules for the meets.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
That's good to hear.
It's a small tidbit, but I was wondering how much this would be true. When they're going over the route in advance, they consider doubling or tripling the distance to take a more randomized pattern. And that's something you hear about all the time with like spies and espionage, and they double back on themselves. But in terms of the actual motorcade with the DCI going to, a meet, would they have considered that? Because they end up taking the most direct route. They say, let's cut down on time. Speed is our friend, in and out. Let's just go to A to B. But that also makes them predictable. So is that one of those tools in your arsenal?
Absolutely. When we're out doing that advanced work, like I mentioned, we'd be out there a week ahead. We're running routes. You're always running 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 different routes. You've got a ton of them in your hip pocket there for multiple reasons. You're on one. There's a fender bender that's got things backed up. There's another one. There's construction. There's and different ones for whatever reasons. But the big thing, like you just mentioned, Mike, was that unpredictability is, if we've got, 4 or 5 different routes, we can choose whichever one we want to take. Now, again, timing does play a role in it, right? So if, for example, we were in Amman and we were going to meet the King of Jordan, we're not going to keep the king waiting, right? We're not going to take any chances, in that case that, we're going to get hung up in traffic because we're taking a long roundabout way to get there. But for something like this in Mosul, if you deem that was, the best way to go and it was, unpredictable, as long as there was enough time and enough leeway to make it happen, whether, Irene got in a little bit early or whatever it was, to kind of be sort of on time for the meet, it would definitely be an option, because the biggest tool that we have as protective agents is that unpredictability. The thing that'll get you killed and get you in trouble is being time and place predictable.
Yep.
The bad guys have all the advantages. They can pick when the attack happens. They can pick where it happens. If, as part of their targeting cycle, they've been doing their surveillance, they know kind of what you normally roll with as far as vehicles and number of people and what weapons you're carrying. So they can bring more guys and they can bring bigger guns. And so they have all the advantages. The thing that we use is just that shell game, changing up the times, changing up the vehicles, changing up the routes, just not falling into a pattern and making it harder on them. Because the more options they have to cover, especially in those early stages with the surveillance, the more people they have to put out, then there's more of the opportunity for us to identify and spot some of that, and then know that something's up. So that unpredictability is a big piece of what we do.
But I want to loop back to your book, because there's a key piece of technology that plays a central role in your book, and I wonder how drones specifically could enhance the world of security and protection, and if they're relied on at all in that field, or the way you work them into your book, is really just for the military and for operations. Is technology like drones ever used from a security and surveillance perspective for protection?
So I would say that nowadays probably more so. At the time that I was still at the agency, I think they were kind of in the beginning stages. They were mostly used for military, and then obviously the CIA was using them for drone strikes, on high value targets and things of that nature. I think they probably were used for surveillance, but probably more in a military mode. But nowadays, If you were in a zone, whether it was a war zone, a high risk area, someplace where those drones were flying, and you were there, say, with, the DCI or another high ranking government official, the Secretary of State or whoever, I certainly don't think it would be unreasonable that you might look to see if, you could put one of those up to keep an eye out on things around the area, while you were there on the ground.
So aircraft play a really big role in your book. I mean, the title is Drone Strike, and
sure.
Yes.
there is a little twist about what that drone strike means. We're not going to give it away here. But how did you come to put so much about UAVs? You even have some scenes with B-2s and F-35s. And why did it play such a central role? And did you have experience as a pilot or in flight?
A lot of research. You really hit a lot of
Right.
a lot of specs. I don't know. I really appreciate reading it.
Yeah, try not to get too technical with some of the specs, but I thought there were some areas where it was kind of necessary to kind of further the story.
Yeah.
For this one of the first, or maybe when I was still writing Tehran's Vengeance, or right when I'd finished, I'd pictured a scene at a clandestine drone base, out in the desert someplace, that was a CIA base, flying drone missions out of there. Had some experience, knowing people who had worked or run some of those bases, kind of bounced some ideas off of them, and kind of came up with the idea for the twist in the story. I don't know exactly where it came from, but I was like, well, it can't just be the U.S. flying drones around and taking out terrorists and bad guys and stuff like that. There had to be something going on, and with everything going on in Syria right now, the heavy Russian presence there, and then moving in North Africa, things of that nature, had to get them involved. And when Russia's involved, it's always going to be no good. So that was kind of where the drone piece came from. The other planes, the B-2s, the F-35s, it was really funny, and I was hoping to get the book out a lot earlier. But at the end, where we talk about the use of those aircraft and the number of targets that they were going to hit, 50 targets at least. There was a point last year or end of the 2020 where President Trump actually made mention in a press conference about striking 50 targets in a certain country. And I had already written it, and it was, the book was like with the agency's publication review board. And I was like, I got to get this out before he does something, because nobody will believe that I wrote it first,
Right,
So,
yeah, right.
So, I figured, at the end and with those planes, there had to be some type of retribution going on for everything that had happened. And, we were just going to do kind of a massive airstrike. Because I think, President Andrews, he'd been dealing with these guys for a long time, had really just kind of had enough is enough.
Yeah.
And, if they didn't get the message before, then, this time we're going to send them a message that, there's no room for misunderstanding.
Definitely have the message now.
It's interesting, though, thinking about the timing and current events. This book was published December 2020. Was it? Mm-hmm. It was earlier in 2020. Our whole incident with General Soleimani and some airstrikes back and forth, and I was really wondering. I'm like, are we going to kind of pull the trigger first? Will it be them? Will this be the spark? And cooler heads prevailed in the end, I guess one could say.
Sure.
Do current events like that? You kind of touched on it already, but what you just said made me think of those events. Did those play a role as you were writing? Was it mostly done already?
It was mostly done by the time that Soleimani was killed. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I was like, holy smokes, that's crazy.
And pulling a Kyle with the whole coronavirus thing.
Yeah, exactly.
That could have been a thriller. Yeah,
for sure. So that everything had already been written by that point. But current events do play a role. Right. Every morning I got a routine. I get up, I got a whole bunch of Google alerts on different regions of the world and, terrorism and this and that. And I scroll through those, finding different stories that might, kind of pique my interest and think could be an idea. And I set them aside in a file.
Keep a notebook.
So
keep a journal.
Yeah, I want to make it something that's relevant, to what's going on in the world at the time. Make it, hopefully entertaining, and just something that people can kind of relate to.
Well, I know your book just came out in December, but do you have an idea for book number 3?
What's next?
I have. I've started on the third one. I'm about 7 chapters or so in, kind of early stages. Okay. But yeah, working on it. So we'll see how it goes. And I keep going back and forth on the plot, making minor, tweaks and changes and stuff until I get it just, get comfortable with it. But yeah, I am working on the third one now.
All right.
Cool. Can't wait to read it.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, you've had some time. Have you thought of any cool stories you can give us from maybe a trip abroad on a protection detail, or most interesting place the job has taken you to?
Yeah, you can just answer that.
Most interesting place? I think let's see. We went to Sarajevo a couple of times. That was really cool. Tbilisi, Georgia. And that one was really interesting because we were there, and it wasn't long after there'd been the assassination attempt on Edward Shevardnadze, who was the president at the time. And so we were able to get with members of his detail and go down and walk along the area where the attack actually took place and kind of walk through it with them and have them talk with us about it from a firsthand experience. But there's all kinds of funny stories that go on. You talk about how in the book Protect and Defend, obviously the local cops there were a big part of the problem. One of the things that we did on occasion, if we weren't comfortable, is we would tell the local guys that this is the route we were going to take. And they would have all their guys out, blocking traffic and post it up on the side of the road.
You would go a different way,
and we'd go the totally opposite direction.
Bait and switch.
Absolutely, yeah. We're not having that.
That's awesome.
We would routinely. I had a buddy of mine on the detail who spoke a foreign language, so when we would go in for the meetings with the locals, I'd tell them, hey, do me a favor, don't let on that you speak the language. So when we're talking with them, and then they go off and they huddle by themselves or whatever, just make sure that they're not trying to screw us here. Yeah. Stuff like that. And so, that kind of stuff goes on all the time.
That's pretty good. I mean, Mitch Rapp does speak 4 or 5 languages. So he's doing that all the time.
He speaks a lot more than I do. Yeah. I can order a beer and ask where the bathroom is in about 5 or 6, but that's about as far as it goes.
That's the most important.
What else do you need?
Exactly.
All right. Well, we don't want to take up too much of your time. We really appreciate you coming here, but we like to finish off our interviews by asking our interviewees, what was the last great thing that they consumed in media? Could be a book, TV series, movie. What are you consuming now?
What am I consuming? I just finished a book called Warrior's Creed. It's by Roger Sparks, who was a Marine Force Recon, and then got out. And then if that wasn't enough punishment, he went in the Air Force and became a pararescue jumper. So kind of hearing that was pretty cool. Right now I'm in the middle of Mark Graney's latest book, Relentless. Nice. Love the Gray Man, one of my all-time favorites. So I'm reading that. As far as TV shows, my wife and I are into Prodigal Son right now. I don't know if you guys have watched that one.
It's pretty good.
But that one's pretty cool. We're really enjoying it. And I think that's kind of what we're working on right now.
Cool.
Nice.
I'll have to check out that book.
Yeah. And we're going to get the Gray Man on the big screen. So
yes, that'll be cool. That'd be pretty cool. Looking forward to that.
All right. So everyone out there, if you could go ahead and get your copy of Drone Strike if you don't already have it. But if you could just tell us, how can our followers find you? Are you on Instagram, Facebook, Social media?
Yep.
Like
Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all at Dave Austin Books. And then my website as well, daveaustinbooks.com. Don't spend a whole lot of time on Facebook. It's kind of my least favorite of the platforms. I do most of my interaction with everybody on Twitter or Instagram. So those are the two where I am most often. But yeah, Dave Austin Books across the board.
Cool.
That's great.
Hey, can you guys do me a favor?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I know you talked to Kyle a bunch. And so the next time you talk to Kyle, I need you to give him an apology from me. Because back when Vince first passed away and Kyle took over, I was such a huge Vince fan that I was like, there's no way some new guy coming in is going to be able to keep up with the quality and everything.
That was a common feeling, though.
So I put it off and I put it off and I put it off. And finally, my daughter read the book that he finished. And then maybe the next one. And she came to me because she is a big time Mitch Rapp fan and Kyle Mills and Vince. And she says, Dad, you got to get it. It's great. It's fantastic. And so, I went kind of, dragging and screaming. She dragged me to it and read it, and it was awesome. And then everyone since then has been phenomenal. So the next time you talk to Kyle, tell him I apologize for doubting him, but he is the man because he's carried on the tradition and he's making Vince and Mitch proud. That's for sure.
That was a common feeling, and he won us all over. He just won us all over with The Survivor and every other one. Yep. No hard feelings, I'm sure he'll say.
Yes, definitely. He's a nice guy too. So
just buy his newest book, pre-order Enemy at the Gates, and you're good to go.
Yeah, will do.
All right. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. It was a blast.
Hope you enjoyed the interview with David Austin. Coming to you next week, we have a very special interview. I'm not going to tell you who it is yet, but you're going to like it. So look for that in wherever you get your podcasts. We said at the top, we'll say it again. We want to thank our patrons, including our special operator, Sherry F., and our special agents, George, Matt, Dawn, Dennis, Peggy, Catherine, Ray, Bridget, and Jeff. Please subscribe, rate, and review us using your favorite podcasting platform. Find us at mitchrappod.com or using our Twitter handle at mitchrappod. And as always, just let Mitch be Mitch. Just a disclaimer, this podcast is not affiliated with Vince Flynn, Kyle Mills, or Simon & Schuster, but thank you to them for bringing us the wonderful world of rap. And the music soundtrack is Guerrilla Tactics by Raphael Crooks.